Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2:50, and it's time to begin our program on interpreting Indigenous Homeland World Heritage Sites. My name is Tom Cassidy. I am a trustee of US ICOMOS, and I'm also the Vice President of Government Relations for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Over the next hour, we will hear presentations from an impressive group of speakers, including Governor Brian Vallo from the Pueblo of Acoma, Ilona Spruce, the Tourism Director for Taos Pueblo Tourism, Jen Aultman from Ohio History Connection, and Chief Glenna Wallace from the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma. Afterwards, we'll have an opportunity of questions and answers from the online audience. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen here to pose questions for our panelists. Questions posted in the chat may not be read. So this is sort of virtually a meeting hosted from the District of Columbia, since that's where US ICOMOS is formerly headquartered. I live across the river in Arlington. And the District of Columbia is surrounded by over a dozen tribal nations that thrived along the Anacostia and Potomac rivers and also the Chesapeake Bay area. The District of Columbia itself is the ancestral homeland of the Anacostans or Nacotchtank tribes, and their neighbors, the Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. So in the United States, we have 24 World Heritage Sites. 12 are inscribed for natural resource values, 11 for cultural resource values, and 1 for both cultural and natural resource values. 5 of our World Heritage Sites were specifically inscribed for their Native American cultural heritage value. They include Chaco culture, Cahokia, Poverty Point, Mesa Verde, and Taos Pueblo. Taos is the only World Heritage Site that is owned by its traditional tribal nation. And I would also note that generally, the interpretation of so many of these sites from the World Heritage Committee, at times more traditionally the Park Service, it really has focused upon the archaeological resource values and not the fact that there are continuing connections with Indigenous people who have lived in these places since time immemorial. So with that, I would like to turn and introduce our first panel member, Governor Brian Vallo from the Pueblo of Acoma. The governor has more than 30 years of working in the areas of historic preservation, museum planning, repatriation, cultural resource management, and tourism and the arts. Governor Vallo is a former lieutenant governor. He was the founding director of the Acoma Historic Preservation Office and also the Sky City Cultural Center and Haku Museum. Governor Vallo, thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Guadzi Hopa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join this important conversation. I just first want to say a little bit about Acoma. Acoma Pueblo is, just like Taos Pueblo, considered one of the older continuously inhabited settlements in North America. Our traditional homeland of Acoma is a sacred place with connections to ancestral settlements within the Four Corners region of the country, of the United States. We have a strong culture and tradition. We maintain our language and work very hard to preserve all these blessings of our Creator that have been bestowed upon us. You know, this subject that we are discussing today is something that's very important to all of us, to every Native American and Indigenous community throughout the world. And rarely do we have the opportunity to be at the table when discussions around you know, interpretation and stewardship and access to these places which remain integral to the continuance of our culture and the practice of our cultures. And that remains a challenge for all of us. However, I do, and I'm hopeful that our recent history and our recent involvement and advocacy within the federal government system, as well as our respective state governments, have provided some opportunities for us to be directly involved, to express our concerns and our needs relative to these issues that I identified around the places like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. But there's still much to do. There are many complex issues that we deal with daily around these issues. And Acoma in particular, my tribe has been an active advocate and really a partner with organizations internationally, but also here within the United States, and have, you know, been working very closely with the Congress, the various administrations of this country, and with our tribal partners to ensure that our needs are considered and that we maintain an active role in these discussions and the discourse around, you know, the more complex issues. I want to first start by saying a little bit about, or talking a little bit about connection. You know, as I mentioned, I'm going to try and share my screen here. Maybe that might not work. I'm sorry. Anyway, I want to talk about connection and connection to place and space. As you know, Tom had mentioned, you know, we have these connections to these cultural landscapes, and not necessarily only the remnants or the archaeological remnants that exist on these landscapes, but the vast land area that surround these archaeological resources. The cultural resources are many, and they are the most important components to our contemporary tribes as we carry out our cultures and our traditions. And so, you know, we are always very, very concerned about maintaining access and to these areas, whether it be an archaeological site within the Chaco National Park, or within Mesa Verde National Park proper, or perhaps a landmark or a sacred site or a shrine or a natural spring, or another cultural resource that is not necessarily part of that park proper. And so these are very, very critical and important to us. And we've been actively involved, as I said. We have participated in consultation. Sometimes consultation doesn't always yield the preferred outcomes, but the consultation that happens between the federal agency who manages these resources with the tribes who have cultural affinity are just so critical, because it then documents, and it our wishes, our requests, and it also then prompts further discussion then about, interpretation and programming, partnership and collaboration between our tribes and the agencies who manage these sites. And in some cases, there are many managers. Sometimes it isn't only the federal agency like the National Park Service, but perhaps there are some state lands involved. There might be tribal lands that are involved in close proximity to that cultural landscape, or that comprise that cultural landscape. And so the situation becomes even more complex then, because we then have to consider process and consultation and partnership with the many other stewards of these resources. For many years, the Pueblo of Acoma has been directly involved with Mesa Verde National Park and Chaco culture for decades now. We have been in discussions and in partnership around issues of repatriation of ancestral human remains and their associated funerary objects, and also cultural patrimony. But we have also been engaged in these conversations about the interpretation and the story, the narrative that is conveyed to visitors to these areas. We have always insisted upon being considered as part of the team who develops programming, the educational and interpretive programming at these locations. And here again, we sometimes prevail in having an active voice and involvement in that. Other times, where our ideas are maybe not considered for a variety of reasons. We are also always interested to continue to study these areas, and with regard to Chaco Canyon, Acoma has been very much at the forefront in the advocacy associated with protecting Chaco Canyon, and working with the consortium of tribes in New Mexico, the other Pueblo tribes, and there are 20 of us in partnership with the Navajo Nation, and also the Hopi tribe in Arizona, all of whom have cultural affinity to Chaco Canyon, but working together with our congressional delegates to towards the development of legislation that would provide some protections of these cultural landscapes at Chaco Canyon. So, this work is quite complex, but it's so necessary and important, and we remain committed towards that, being engaged on that level. We have established the Chaco Heritage Tribal Association, which I chair, and we have just received some federal funding to conduct some additional ethnographic work, a cultural resources survey of the greater Chaco region, for purposes of protecting and substantiating our claims and our requests for the protection of that cultural landscape. And it's far-reaching. We hope that this work will become the guiding document for federal agencies and state agencies and others who are considering development in this area. As some of you might know, there is great oil and gas development, and this is very concerning for the Pueblo of Acoma and other tribes. We have other issues that we are also concerned about relative to the environment and the public health then that is compromised as a result of this type of industry within this cultural landscape. In addition to some of this work, we are also working with numerous institutions and museums throughout the country, including the National Park Service, who steward collections of material culture. And so we want to be in the know as far as how these collections are being stewarded and the ways in which we can be involved, and the opportunities, of course, then for repatriation of especially our our ancestral remains and their associated funerary materials. So I really appreciate this opportunity to say a few words about this idea of interpretation and stewardship and partnership, and thinking about the future is so important in all of this work, that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and their children will continue to be connected to these places. Our bloodlines run through our veins and are connected directly to these sacred and cultural landscapes. And so the work that we are doing today to preserve and protect are so important because it then ensures that that connection is maintained by future generations of Acoma people who will continue to utilize these resources as they maintain identity and our existence as Acoma people. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Vallo. I've been very fortunate in hearing you make a presentation to the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference, a plenary session just 2 weeks ago. And one of your comments that really stuck with me was, preservation is thinking about the generations to come, just as our ancestors did for us. So now we're fortunate to have our next speaker is Ilona Spruce, the tourism director for Taos, Pueblo. It's all yours, Ilona.
Okay. Hi there. Thank you, everybody, for having me this afternoon. I appreciate the time that you've given to our presentations. I am the director of Taos Pueblo Tourism, and I have been in this position for around 10 years now. Sometimes that feels wild saying that. We are a UNESCO site, and we were designated in 1992. And I just I had a simple PowerPoint just to share with you all, and to kind of give everybody a frame of reference to the community. And so that's what I wanted to just kind of show everybody, where we, what our home looks like, and where we reside as far as being a UNESCO site. So currently today, we are closed to the public indefinitely due to Corona, but at one point we were seeing around over 100,000 people coming into the community. We've also have a lot of historical content that comes along with being from Taos Pueblo, and maintaining the land and the relationship to the land. There's a lot of history for us coming through, since we've been here. Just an overview of Taos Pueblo for everyone who's listening in is that we're originally known as the Red Willow people. Taos Pueblo was the name given to us and established with the Spanish. There's a wide range of what Taos actually means. There's not really a definite definition of where that comes from. from my knowledge, there's an old story that it comes from the Tewa language, which is T-E-W-A, not T-I-W-A, and it means to the north. But there's a whole lot of speculation of that. We do stick to the establishment of being here for over 1,000 years. Our language is Tiwa, and we have about 2,800 members right now within the community. And so the Pueblo is definitely a major hub for the community. And so, you know, it tells a story. The actual physical place of the Pueblo tells our story. And that's something that's really, you know, truly unique and special, especially with a UNESCO site, just because we are a living site. I've met, you know, plenty of other representatives from some of the UNESCO sites where they are a living site, but it's, you know, sometimes it's been blocked off, but we still have people still living in our homes and still yearly taking care of homes, even if they aren't lived in year round. There's still a respect and a care and love to the area. So we had our first contact around 1560 with the Spanish. You move into 1680 with the Pueblo Revolt, where Taos was a huge component to the Pueblo Revolt in leading it, with the leader from San Juan Pueblo, or Okeawinge Cope. And then we also indulged into the 1847 Taos Revolt, and that was against the US cavalry coming in, and that was joining in on the Mexican-American War. And then we have in 1906, Blue Lake Wilderness is taken away, which kicks off the fight for Blue Lake. In 1970, we have the return of Blue Lake to Taos. So those are just some key factors in our timeline from the community since we've had our first interactions with the Spanish coming in. As far as our land being taken away in 1906 from the federal government, it really put a huge, it really just, it took away everything. It took away our whole way of life from who we are, and we really maneuvered into a different way of being at that time. Prior to 1906, we really depended upon the land, the water, hunting rights, and that everything in that realm. After 1906, when we didn't have authority to utilize the land for hunting or irrigating water to our cornfields or anything like that. And so you see this transformation of a dependency taking place on the town area, which is established only within 2 miles of the actual Pueblo area. And so you see this change and this shift in our way of being. And so I just wanted to give you guys a reference to the Pueblo and how it works. So as a result, we started seeing an influx coming into the community in the early 1900s with artists coming in, and you start seeing the establishment of the Taos Art Society. So you start seeing this transition of the community going from a full hunting and agricultural community to actually depending on outside resources. And outside resources meaning like going to the mill in the town of Taos and buying those items now, buying meat, trading for those items, whereas we just had the luxury of going into our backyards and being able to hunt. All of that was taken away when Blue Lake was taken away. And so you see a transition in you see a transition happen within even our social settings, who we are as a people. You see this difference of dependency happen on the community. Then in 1970, we acquire the Blue Lake Wilderness area back into the community, fully with hunting rights, water rights. And so you start seeing this reestablishment of agricultural practices and whatnot. But for Taos, you do see that there is a break in some of our agricultural practices that we do. And so, and a lot of that has to do with the Blue Lake area taken away from us. In 1960, we were established as a National Historic Landmark. And then in 1992, we went into being a UNESCO World Heritage Site. As far as becoming a World Heritage Site, we really, that platform really gave us the notoriety of the community. I don't think the community really understood how important we were in the world of destinations and preservation and whatnot. It was just who we were, and that's what we did. When UNESCO came in and we got this designation, there was like a peak of like, wow, like, I think it really brought a realization into the community, you know, of what we carry here. And it did open doors. We had always been seeing visitors coming here since, around the 1900s with the establishment of the Art Society and whatnot. But having the UNESCO status kind of gave us this international platform that we hadn't really seen before. And so we had this national platform, but we also saw a change in the way people interacted with the community. It was just no longer a site to come to. It actually had this established designation behind it. And so what's happened now is that we've utilized the destination to, the designation to our advantage. And we've been able to get funding to help us with preservation of the buildings that we do have within our, and to help establish longevity of the buildings, just because we're going on over 1,000 years old, 1,000-year-old buildings. And so we are seeing issues with some of the buildings that we have. We've also had to reestablish, traditional techniques, study them, learn them, and then continue to move on with that. So I just wanted to give a quick idea of what Taos Pueblo kind of represent, or what Taos Pueblo is, who we are, and kind of a brief history. I mean, this is really fast, the 10 minutes. Usually we could probably talk hours. I'm sure Governor Vallo feels the same way about our homes. And so with Taos Pueblo, in having the World Heritage Site designation, it's really helped us establish a foundation and to move forward with how we present the community. I feel that it's really a platform for not just Taos Pueblo, but even for the Native community to voice our stories and our opinions. We see people from around the world come through here. And I don't, and I know Acoma has their heritage center and whatnot, and their cultural center. And we don't have that. So at this time, I just wanted to briefly say is that we are sitting in a in different formats, so that way we're able to, tell our story to every generation and for them to understand as well before entering the community, and almost like creating a buffer to the Pueblo before entering. Right now, the Pueblo has always operated where each person just goes straight into the community without there being a buffer. And so in my years of being the tourism director, I've noticed that we don't have that buffer. And so we're getting every single person coming in to the community without having, the basic knowledge of who we are. At times there's this, at times there's a misinterpretation that we are not a living community. at times there is, you know, misinterpretation of who we are as Pueblo people. And I think at times, you know, having that buffer would be ideal for us. And so, and being able to tell our story in general. And so with being able to tell that story, we need to be able to have a facility to do that. And so I'm really proud to say that the tribe has made those maneuvers, and hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll be able to say that we have a heritage center prior to entering Taos Pueblo. The other idea behind that is in order to preserve more of the property and the area. And so that's where we're at right now as far as our movement with utilizing the World Heritage Site status.
Well, thank you, Ilona.
Tom, did you?
I just wanted to thank you. And 10 minutes is not very much time for more than 1,000 years of history, but thank you so much for sharing that overview. And I'm looking forward to visiting with a visitor center or not. What I'd like to do now, though, is go on to our next speakers. And I'm very pleased to introduce Jen Aultman, who is the World Heritage Director for Ohio History Connection. And she is presenting with Chief Glenna Wallace, the first female chief of the Eastern Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma. So let's go to Ohio.
Thank you, Tom. We're here. I'm in Ohio, and Chief Wallace in Oklahoma. Good to see you, Chief.
Good to see you.
And I'm going to take just a couple minutes at the beginning because we're in a we have a different situation with what we're talking about here and the earthworks in Ohio, where probably some of you know a little bit about the earthworks, but I'm going to just do a quick overview so you can see them. I have some photos and a quick presentation just to orient everybody, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Wallace to make some remarks. Let me just share my screen real fast. And thank you so much, Tom, and everyone. It's been wonderful to hear everyone's story, and we have so much to learn here in Ohio because, like I said, we're in a very different situation. And so that's what I hope you all can see when we get through the presentation. So right there, that's the Octagon Earthworks in Newark, Ohio that you're seeing. And I'll come to show you exactly where that is and how this fits into our work. We are working on a World Heritage nomination. So these are not yet designated World Heritage sites. We have, I'll show it the map momentarily, but we have a real partnership of people who are working to make this happen. And I would love to put up many, many logos on this page. And but I want to talk through a little bit of who our partners are. So this nomination includes 8 American Indian earthworks that are about 2,000 years old. And 5 of them are stewarded by the National Park Service, 3 of them by the Ohio History Connection. And we're the state's nonprofit history partner. So, you know, we're a 501c3 organization, which means we work a little bit differently from the Park Service, but we partner together. And then you'll see this logo for World Heritage Ohio, which is a wonderful group of people, stakeholders from Ohio and beyond. And Chief Wallace has been on our steering committee for that organization for many years. People who really care about these sites and want to see them achieve World Heritage designation. And so we have a great team of people. And then you'll see that's Mound City Earthworks near Chillicothe, Ohio in the photo. These are the sites on the nomination. So this is Ohio, and I should have put an image of the United States up here, but Lake Erie is at the top. And you'll notice the Newark Earthworks on the east side here. That includes 2 separate earthworks. They used to be part of the same complex, but they've been divided by development and destruction in the middle of this complex. So that's the Octagon Earthworks in the Great Circle. And then 5 earthworks around the Chillicothe area. Those are all National Park Service sites: Hopewell Mound Group, Mound City, Hopeton Earthworks, High Bank Works, and Sipe earthworks. And then Fort Ancient is an Ohio History Connection site in southwestern Ohio. And I think one of the things I like to point out to people, because if you're not familiar with Ohio, you may not realize that every one of these sites is in a major river drainage that leads to the Ohio River, which is the southern boundary of Ohio. So while today they are connected by roads and so on, they are also connected by water, which is too easily lost upon us today. And this image I wanted to share just shows, as of 1914, these were the over 10,000 mound and 500 American Indian earthworks that were documented in Ohio. So for a state that today has no federally recognized tribes present, there is such an incredible American Indian history in this state, 12,000 plus years, and tens of thousands of mounds and earthworks. A few of them survive, many do not. So just the briefest orientation to the sites on the nomination. The earthworks they're about 2,000 years old, 1,500 to 2,000 years. And I'm just gonna run through some images. You'll see some of these are sort of digital reproductions of what we think the earthworks look like, but it's the vastness of these places that I'm hoping you can see. It's very hard to convey in the photographs and images. But to give you an example, Fort Ancient is this hilltop enclosure on the left. It's 125 acres enclosed in earthworks that were built using one basket of earth at a time. And also on the right, you see the importance of water that's also built into the earthworks, these ponding areas. And so for World Heritage, we're working on a nomination that really presents two criteria that we think these sites collectively meet, and that's that they're masterpieces of human creative genius, and they bear unique or exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition. And you'll see that's the entranceway to the Great Circle in Newark and Heath, Ohio. They survive quite well to today. Some of them, a few do. So really quickly, this is the quickest I can possibly do just to give you an example of that human creative genius. The octagon earthworks in Newark, Ohio. You'll see it's a circle and an octagon connected to each other. And again, they were part of a much larger complex. That circle itself is 1,200 feet across. Right? The octagon even larger. So they're incredible size. And our best interpretation is that these were gathering places for many, many people. And the octagon is aligned to an 18.6-year lunar cycle. So really deep knowledge of the cosmos is built into these earthworks. Just one other example of those types of alignments that we see with the earthworks. This is Mound City in Chillicothe, and it's aligned astronomically and also within the landscape to the Logan Range. So you can see how the summer solstice, minimum northern moonrise, equinoxes, they all connect Mound City with the Logan Range, with the sky, with the sun and moon. And then geometrical precision. We see across Ohio in these earthworks, circles of the same size, separated by tens, dozens of miles, the same units of measure used over and over again at many different earthworks that are widely separated. And so there's an incredible genius in the astronomy, in the geometry, in the knowledge that went into creating these. And I will just a couple of brief words about the exceptional testimony. These are some of just the incredible artistic objects that have been found at some of the earthworks. And what I really want to stress here, in addition to the artistry, is that these, and I'm going to skip ahead here one, that these materials that the objects are made of, they come from across the eastern 2/3 of North America. So you see obsidian from what's now Yellowstone National Park, shell from the Gulf of Mexico, silver from southern Canada, and it was all coming into the Middle Ohio River Valley 2,000 years ago. And I realize that I say all of these things that I'm presenting a very archaeological perspective. And Tom and I spoke about this yesterday a little bit. That is sort of where we have been in Ohio, because tribes have been, they were forcibly removed. And so as we stand here today, these earthworks connect people, the earth, and the cosmos across space and time, but they have very much existed in the past in people's minds. And so we are working to bring them into the present and the connection to living tribal nations today. This is a photo from our Tribal Nations Conference in 2016, which we now do annually at the Ohio History Connection at the Great Circle Earthworks. And so working on that collaboration, we're doing consultation, but looking towards how can we really be collaborative in interpreting and making these living places for tribal nations today. And so with that, I would just want to say, as I pass it off to Chief Wallace, that we have approximately 45 plus tribes that have historic ties to Ohio. And again, none are headquartered here today, but we're working on that reconnection. So Chief Wallace, I would love to pass it off to you now, and I will stop sharing my screen so everyone can see you.
That's not my picture. As soon as we come back on, you should.
We could see you just a moment ago. Yeah, there you are. We can see you and hear you now.
Can you see me?
We can, yes.
Okay. As Jan said, our story is quite different from other stories, and my story is particularly different. As she indicated, these marvelous ruins, these marvelous entities are located in Ohio. And the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830. And my tribe, along with another tribe where we were called the Mixed Band, we were forcibly removed from Ohio in 1832. So even though these are our treasures, even though these are our histories, we have never been permitted to participate in them. So let me begin with my story, is because I was not raised in a traditional sense of being Native American. I was not active in a tribe, but neither were most of my tribal members. We left Ohio by foot in 1832. And by the 1900, we were down to only 69 people. So it was truly an example of an almost total successful genocide. And to survive, we were not able to retain our traditional ways. And we're actually regaining our history now, learning about that time. And so I'm going to go back to my personal story. Tom, you may have to stop me because I've been a college professor for almost 40 years, with every single day teaching a class that lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes. Those are hard habits to break. And so 10 minutes is exceptionally difficult for me. The small community college where I taught is a very rural college in a very poor area. And we recognized immediately that our students had limited exposure to cultural experiences. Our students had limited exposure to diversity. The same is true with our adults and with our population within it. community college district. And so we wanted to change that. And we initiated some programs with the intent to try to influence that. So we initiated student exchanges of having our students go to other colleges, both within the United States and overseas. We did the same thing with faculty exchanges, and we did the same thing with travel. I, for some reason, was named, I have always been a communications major, and I was named Director of Communications and Fine Arts of the largest department that we had here at this college. And I did not have a background in fine arts at all. So it was decided that since we had very little fine arts in our area, we would take our students and our general population to areas and introduce them to fine arts. And I became the director of that program in connection with being the director of fine arts and communication. So consequently, for more than 20 years, twice a year, I was responsible for organizing trips abroad, taking people throughout the world, and I was responsible for researching that, for determining where we would go, what we would see, what we would do. And so in that course of time, I traveled to more than 70 countries. At that particular time, I didn't realize that I was emphasizing World Heritage Sites. And so I was privileged to have been privileged to go to numerous World Heritage Sites in the world. And so it was by accident that in the year 2000, I had just returned from doing a faculty exchange in Australia, where I had taught 3 different universities there. And I had not been back from there for probably a month when a gentleman came into my office. And that gentleman was Dr. Michael Vallo, who was the chair of Missouri Humanities. And 2000, if you think about your history, 2000 was beginning to be the preparation time for the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark, or the Corps of Discovery. And that Corps of Discovery began in Missouri. I am a tribe that we are located in Oklahoma, but we are located exactly on the Oklahoma-Missouri line. So I live 2 miles from my tribe, but I am located in the state of Missouri, and my tribe is located in the state of Oklahoma. Dr. Michael Bauman had canvassed the state of Missouri, and he wanted every single tribe that had been mentioned in the Lewis and Clark journals to be represented in the bicentennial and the programs that were presented in Missouri. And he was of the opinion that the tribes had been shortchanged in the original, and he did not want that to occur again. So he had a personal mission to contact every single tribe and to have a representative from that tribe to give programs throughout the state of Missouri for those 2 years of 2003 to 2005. Somehow my name came up, even though I was not a traditional Native American, even though I was not steeped in my culture, because basically we didn't have a culture for our tribe to be steeped in. And he contacted me and said, I want you to represent the Shawnees because you were mentioned in the Lewis and Clark journals, and we were there at that time in Cape Girardeau. And that was several of our, in the year 1800, even though we were not removed until 1832, in the year of 1800, we had more Shawnees living in Missouri than we did in Ohio. And so I was selected, and I argued with Dr. Bowman. I said, I've done lots of public speaking. I'm not afraid of speaking. I've done lots of research. I know how to research, but I do not know the history of my tribe, and nor does anyone else, unfortunately. And he simply looked at me and he said, Chief Wallace, this is the year 2000. You don't have to present this program until 2003. You have 3 years, and if you're ever going to know the history of your tribe, then now is the time to do it. And I said, you're right. And so I picked up that challenge. So for 3 years, I researched, I read, I participated in everything that I could. I went to Ohio numerous times. I made visits. I did everything I could to learn about my tribe. And then I presented programs from 2003 through 2005 in Chautauqua format throughout the state of Missouri and many other places. So I felt that by that time I did know quite a bit about my tribe, and I thought I knew quite a bit about Ohio since that had been our last homeland. After that ended in 2005, I decided that I was certainly old enough to retire from a teaching career, but I was naive enough to think that because I loved my job so much there at the college, that I could continue to be a full-time employee there and be chief of this tribe as well. And so I ran for the office of chief in 2006, and I was elected. The office of chief required much more than I had realized, and I'm not a person to take a job lightly, and I felt that I was shortchanging both of them. So I retired at the end of the first semester in the year 2006. Because most of our tribal members knew very little about their tribe, I thought that one of the easiest ways would to begin a series of travels, since I had done so much traveling, and we would organize bus tours back to Ohio. So in 2007, we took 2 bus loads. We had 100 tribal citizens who traveled to Ohio. And also in the year 2007, it was a pivotal year for me because the University of Ohio, or that's not correct, Ohio State University, OSU, they had a lecture series. And in this lecture series, they were having a famous author by the name of, he's from England, and John Sugden. And John Sugden was going to be appearing there at Ohio State University. And I wanted to hear him because he was lecturing. He had written a book on Tecumseh, and I wanted to hear that lecture. And so I traveled to Ohio and listened to the lecture of John Sugden. The Ohio State University had a practice that anyone who did participate in their lecture series, the next day they went to a place called, you guessed it, one of the places that we are now trying to have designated as a World Heritage Site. And that was the earthworks, which was about 30 miles outside of Columbus. I went along. I knew nothing about the earthworks. I had never heard of the earthworks. I went because I wanted to continue to listen to John Sugden. And when we arrived at the earthworks that Jen did not tell you about is there is still a very active golf course on top of this fabulous, fabulous site. And when I arrived, they were having a big tournament that day, and they didn't want any of us there. And in fact, they told us in very uncertain terms, and I'm talking now about the employees, that this was not a good day. We were not welcome. We were in the way. We shouldn't be there. Come back some other time. Well, at that time, it was open to the public only one day a year. And to this day, now, 13 years later, it is still open to the public only 4 days a year. My tribal members have never been able to go on to the lands that were their lands and to the ruins and to the places that we are now trying to have placed into World Heritage Sites. When I was able,
Chief Wallace, Chief Wallace, I'm gonna, you suspected that I might be interrupting you because of time constraints. And we only have a few more minutes, and I want to make sure we have some opportunity for some questions, because I'm getting a note that we've got to be off in about 6 to 10 minutes.
Okay,
if you could just wrap up, and then we'll get some questions.
All right, so from that day, because of all of the travels that I had had before and because of all of the sites that I had been, the minute that I saw I was able to walk up on a platform and look at the Newark Earthworks.
Yeah.
And I just could see they compared to the Great Wall in China. They compared to the Acropolis in Greece. They compared to any place that I had ever been in the world, to the pyramids. And I was at first so proud. And then the longer I stood there, the angrier I became, because hundreds of these had existed in Ohio and they were
Yes.
being destroyed. Hundreds. And no one seemed to be that active at that point of trying to do anything about it. And so that was the moment I vowed that we are going to do something about this. There were a few people, I found out later, who were trying to do something, but we've been connected with Ohio history since 2007, trying to get this into World Heritage status so that we could be there and so that others can go there, because even very few people in Ohio knew of these places.
Well, we will succeed. And I would note that I visited the Newark Earthworks and stood on that like high school football grandstand
Absolutely.
looking over, and it was one of the more, I didn't get to a point of anger, I just got to a point of absolute surrealism that one of the most significant cultural sites in North America was being used as a golf course.
Absolutely. And still is.
Yes. Okay, let's see if we've got, I see a couple of things in the Q&A. Should I read these, or will this be our US ICOMOS behind the scenes master? Well, I'll do it. Oh, there's a question to Governor Vallo to repeat the name of the initiative for stewarding cultural sites, please.
Sure, that is the Chaco Heritage Tribal Association.
Yes.
It's a newly formed association. We were able to establish this with a partial award of made by the Department of Interior to conduct the initial phase of this comprehensive cultural survey.
And then this is a question that I'll put to Jen or Chief Wallace. What is the status of the golf course now? Has the state of Ohio been able to exercise eminent domain or any other measure to close the golf course so that the World Heritage nomination can go forward?
It is still a practicing golf course, and I will turn over to Jen and let her tell you where we are in our legal battles with that.
Yeah, thank you. We have, the Ohio History Connection does have authority, the Ohio legislature, to use an eminent domain. We negotiated for many years and couldn't get anywhere. So we have, we are in the middle of a legal process right now. Ohio History Connection was prevailed in the lower courts, and the country club has appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court. So we will be in the Ohio Supreme Court sometime next year on this case. And that is to be able to buy out the remainder of their lease on the golf course and make it open to the public.
Thank you all for doing that. I'd like to pose a question to Governor Vallo. Jen had a wonderful map that depicted how the people at Hopewell, I think, 1,500 years ago, were trading all across North America. And I know at Chaco, there have been jars with chocolate and macaw feathers. And I wonder if you could just reflect upon the remarkable trade routes that existed 1,000 years ago in Chaco.
Sure, thank you for that question. Very similarly, our ancestors had very extensive trade routes into South America, to the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. So there was interaction, there was known, and not only through our own traditional oral histories and migration stories, but science also verifies that there were these extensive trade routes and cultural exchange that was happening even during those earlier times.
Well, It has been a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to be with each of the panelists here and to share your information with so many people here on this webinar. And I think that what it's time to do, though, all good things have got to come to a close. And it's time for us to close down, and we've got a few minutes to join before the next session starts. And I would encourage people to get there too. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And let's save Chaco. Let's get Hopewell inscribed on the list of World Heritage, and let's keep the vital community of Taos proceeding for the benefit of its people and all of the rest of those of us who are lucky enough to go there. Thank you all.
Thank you.